How Robin Hood Met Little John. This is from the stories of Robin Hood and his merry men, and this book was presented to my father-in-law Stanley Lavender at Kilburn Baptist Sunday School in 1928, so it's a very precious book. When Richard the Lionhearted was King of England, the Earl of Huntingdon was one of the few Saxon noblemen who still possessed land and castles of his own. For since the Normans came over with William the Conqueror, the Saxons had been robbed with a ruthless hand, till many who had once been rich and powerful were now poor, hated and despised, and the Normans were chief rulers in a country that was not by right of birth their own. King Richard the Last spent most of his time fighting in the Crusades in the Holy Land, and England was chiefly governed by Prince John, his brother, a cruel, hard man who hated the Saxons and would have liked to destroy them all. The Earl of Huntingdon was not long to live in peace. One day the Sheriff of Nottingham with a body of armed men attacked his castle. They took the Earl prisoner and burnt the castle to the ground, and the Countess and her son Robert had to flee for their lives. Soon after, the Earl died in Nottingham jail. The Countess died of grief, and Robert was left alone to get on in the world as best he could. Now in those days there were many large forests in England, one of the largest being Sherwood Forest, which stretched over the greater part of Nottingham, Derby and Yorkshire. These forests were the home of the deer and other wild animals, and were guarded by the king's foresters. Their duty was to see that any man who killed a deer should, if caught, lose his ears or even his head. In the wildest parts of the forest too lived many of the outcast Saxons, and others who had suffered under Prince John's cruel laws, and to them went Robert, determined to have his revenge for the death of his parents. In the forest many of Robert's boyhood hours had been spent. He loved the feel of the moss and grass beneath his feet, and the sound of the wind among the trees. He loved the beauty and the freedom of it all. The other outlaws chose him as their leader, and under the greenwood tree they promised to be loyal to him and to each other, to protect women and the poor and downtrodden, and only to take goods or money from those who had made themselves rich by robbing other folk. Robert dropped his title of Earl of Huntingdon and became known as Robin Hood. He and his followers dressed themselves in suits of Lincoln green, so they could not easily be seen as they moved amongst the trees, and soon the doings of Robin Hood and his merry men became famed far and wide, and they formed the favourite subjects for the stories that our forefathers loved to hear long, long ago. These stories were told and sung and were handed down from one generation to another in the form of songs and ballads. And one of the first books printed in England was a collection of the ballads of Robin Hood. Now, one bright morning when the sun shone down through the branches, making golden pathways through the woods, and the birds were singing in the treetops for sheer joy of being alive, Robin Hood and his merry men arose from their beds of grass and bracken, and after they had washed in the running brook and breakfasted, Robin said, "We have had no sport for 14 days. Wait here, my men, and I will go through the greenwood and see what I can find. And if you hear the sound of my horn, then hasten to my aid." Then away strode Robin Hood, his bow slung across his shoulder, his quiver full of arrows by his side, and presently he came to a brook spanned by a long and narrow bridge. And on the bridge there stood a man, large in limb and 7 feet in height. Good morning, good fellow, quoth Robin Hood. Move on, for I would cross the brook. But the stranger neither moved nor spoke. Then Robin Hood began to cross the bridge, and as he did so he drew from his quiver an arrow feathered with a goose's wing. The stranger only carried a long staff in his hand. If you shoot, I will beat you with my staff, he cried. It would be a coward's act to shoot at me when I have no bow. Then Robin Hood threw aside his bow. No man shall ever call me a coward, he cried. He leapt from the bridge and broke off a stout oaken staff from a tree that grew beside the brook. Then, returning to the bridge, he said, We will fight upon the bridge, and he who makes the other fall into the brook shall be counted to have won. Agreed, cried the stranger, and the great fight began. It was as fine about a quarterstaff as you could wish to see. Swift and fast flew the blows, and the little bridge swayed to and fro. Robin Hood gave the stranger a bang that made his bones ring. I'll give you as good as you bring, the stranger cried, and he gave Robin Hood a crack on his crown. This enraged Robin Hood, and he laid on with his staff more fiercely than before. Faster, faster flew the blows, until at last the stranger gave Robin a blow that tumbled him into the brook. You're a brave fellow, cried Robin Hood as he scrambled out of the brook. I'll fight no more, for you have won the day. Then he blew a loud blast upon his horn, and in a few moments the merry men came running up. Why, master, what's the matter? Cried Will Stutely. You're wet to the skin. That fellow tumbled me into the brook, laughed Robin Hood. Then the outlaws turned upon the stranger, and they would have tumbled him into the brook, had not Robin cried, Wait! Then to the stranger he said, Friend, if you will join my company, I will teach you the use of the bow, and how to shoot at the fat fallow deer. I'll serve you with all my heart, said the stranger. Here is my hand. My name is John Little. We must change his name, cried Will Stutely. Come, let us prepare a feast and be merry. So they all went back to the grove where they lived, and 2 fat does were set to roast over a great fire. Then the merry men stood round in a ring. John Little was placed in the middle, and Will Stutely pointed his staff at him. This infant was called John Little, said he. His name shall be changed anon. The words we'll transpose, so wherever he goes, his name shall be called Little John. Shouts of laughter went up from Robin Hood and his merry men. Little John laughed as heartily as any. Then they feasted and danced and made merry until the sun sank behind the trees. The next morning Robin Hood gave Little John a suit of Lincoln green and a long bow. Let's see if you can shoot, he said. Just then some deer were seen passing over a ridge a long distance away. Little John put an arrow to his bow, and the next moment one of the deer fell dead upon the ground. A good shot, cried Robin Hood. I would ride 100 miles to find one who could shoot better. In Fountain's Abbey, master, said Will Scarlet, there lives a friar who could beat both you and Little John. I will neither eat nor drink until I find him, said Robin Hood. Then Robin Hood put a cap of steel upon his head, and a coat of steel beneath his doublet, and with sword and buckler by his side, and bow and arrows in his hand, he set off in the company of some of his men for Fountain's Abbey.